Welcome to week 4. This week we're exploring the relationship between migration, citizenship, and women's work. Throughout the course, we've seen that women's labor has been shaped by gender, race, and class. This week we'll add another important lens migration. We'll ask how crossing or being unable to cross a border can shape where people work, the opportunities available to them, and their ability to demand fair treatment. One of the great paradoxes of American history is that the United States has long depended on the immigrant labor while often denying immigrant workers full rights and protections. From railroads and farms to garment factories and hospitals, immigrants have performed essential work. Yet they also face discrimination, exploitation, and uncertainty because of their immigration status. Women have experienced migration in especially complex ways. Some immigrate to pursue economic opportunities for themselves. Others migrate to reunite with family members or escape war and political instability. Still others remain behind while spouses or children migrate elsewhere for work. As you'll see this week, migration affects not only individuals, but also families, communities, and ideas about gender. One of our primary reading for the week introduces us to Chinese immigrant women working in New York's garment industry. One fascinating detail is that many Chinese women entered the garment industry only after the changes in U.S. immigration law in 1965. Before then, immigration from China had been severely restricted for decades by laws such as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 abolished the old quota system, opening the door for new waves of immigrants from Asia. Many newly arrived women found work sewing clothing in small garment factories, or what we would maybe call sweatshops. So think back to week 2 when you read about the Triangle Factory fire and the sweated conditions faced by thousands of young women who've recently immigrated from Eastern and Southern Europe. They don't look that different from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The work was repetitive, physically demanding, and paid by piece rather than by the hour. Imagine spending an entire day sewing sleeves onto shirts or attaching zippers, repeating the same motions hundreds of times before going home to cook dinner, care for children, and clean the house. But Jessica Mann's article is not simply a story about exploitation, it's also a story about organizing. One anecdote I particularly like comes from the organizing campaigns themselves. Union meetings often had to be conducted in multiple languages, including Cantonese and Mandarin, because many workers were recent immigrants. Organizers quickly realized if they wanted to build a successful labor movement, they couldn't expect workers to leave behind their language or culture. Instead, they adapted. Union newsletters were translated, bilingual leaders emerged, and community organizations became just as important as the workplace themselves. It's a reminder that successful labor movements often depend on meeting workers where they are. Next, you'll explore a digital archive about the Bracero program. Most history textbooks tell this story as one about Mexican men who crossed the border to work on American farms during and after World War II. Before 1942 and 1964, more than 4 million labor contracts were issued under this program. But this week's archive asks another question as well. What happened to the women who stayed behind? Imagine living in a rural Mexican village while your husband leaves for months at a time to work in California or Texas. Suddenly, you are responsible not only for raising children, but also for managing finances, making household decisions, and sometimes running a farm or family business. One woman interviewed for the archive recalled that before her husband left, neighbors expected her to defer to him on major decisions. After years of managing the household alone, she discovered she was perfectly capable of making these decisions herself. Migration changed not only her daily responsibilities, but also how she saw herself. Of course, that independence came with challenges. Many women worried about their husband's safety, struggled financially when wages were delayed, and coped with long periods of separation. The archive reminds us that migration is never experienced just by one person. It reshapes the lives of entire families. Finally, you'll watch Made in LA, one of my favorite labor history documentaries. The film follows 3 Latina immigrant women, Maria, Lupe, and Mora, who sewed clothing in Los Angeles factories. They discovered that the company producing garments for a major retailer, Forever 21, had failed to pay them the wages they earned. At first, organizing seemed almost impossible. Some workers feared retaliation because of their immigration status. Others worried that if they lost their jobs, they wouldn't be able to support their families. One of the most memorable moments in the film comes when the women begin speaking publicly about their experiences. None of them starts out as a professional activist. They're ordinary workers trying to make a living. Yet over the course of the campaign, they become confident public speakers, negotiate with corporate representatives, and travel to tell their stories. Their transformation reminds us that activism is often learned through experience. People don't just have to begin as leaders, they become leaders by responding to the injustice. Another striking aspect of the film is that the campaign lasted for 3 years. Social change rarely happens overnight, and the film really shows that it required persistence, community support, and extraordinary amounts of patience. So, although these stories take place in different decades and involve different immigrant communities, they share several common themes. First, migration created opportunities. Every woman you'll encounter this week is seeking a better future for herself, her family, or her children. Second, migration also creates vulnerability. Immigration status, language barriers, and unfamiliar legal systems can make workers especially susceptible to exploitation. Finally, these materials remind us that immigrant women have never been passive participants in American history. They have organized unions, managed households across borders, challenged employers, and built stronger communities despite enormous obstacles. As you complete this week's texts, please try to keep in mind the question: how does citizenship, or the lack of it, shape a person's ability to work, organize, or belong? We'll see that migration is much more than crossing borders. It's about family, identity, labor, resilience, and the ongoing struggle for dignity and justice in the workplace.